Hey Shugs, so remember last episode when I said that we would for sure do a crime and cosmetics? Might have not been the greatest. Okay, is this what we're doing, camera? We're just gonna start turning? Are you gonna fall over? Oh my god, are we sinking? What's happening? Hey, stop that, buddy. Chill out. What do you guys think? Does this look uneven? I feel like we're a little uneven. Whatever. I think it's good enough though. So I changed the tripod to the Joby that has the level tool on it. So, and then I've got, I guess it's good enough. It's still in the middle thing. We'll see. Hopefully it looks good. And then I've just got my regular Sony tripod so I can do stuff like that. Ooh. And then zoom out and then I can restart recording instead of touching the camera and messing with the level or whatever. But so like I said, I was like, oh, we're gonna do a crime and cosmetics next one, blah 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 blah. Well, that might have been a dumb idea because let's let Ward Chief get settled in the background. You okay? No idea. Because the Columbine massacre was 8 pages of notes. Very information-dense notes, though. A lot of it was times and names, and that's hard to do whenever you're multitasking. This, on the other hand, is 15 pages of notes. So this one might be longer, we will see. So I'm just going to do a look that I can kind of just muscle memory while we talk about this. And hopefully I can make it last the entire story. So we'll see, but let's get started. I've got my primer on, the hair's up, we're ready to go. Bless you! Sorry, War Chief did a big sneeze. Let's go, though. Let's get it done. I hope you're having a fabulous day, by the way. It's good to see you. Okay, right. Okay. All right. Again, I hope you're having a fabulous day. Thanks. Ooh, also, I just I was just hit the number of hours you need to monetize your channel, and my channel is now monetized. The true crime videos are only semi-monetized because of the content that they have in them. But my vlogs and stuff like that are fully monetized. So that's cool. Thank you so much for that. That was all you guys. I mean, I just put the content out. You guys put in the work to actually watch it. And I very much appreciate that. Oclop, also, thank you for the sick gloves that glow in the dark. And thank you for the super awesome Reba t-shirt. I would imagine that was Cyborg that sent that. But we got a primer on. Let's get started. So we go all the way back to June 1977 in good old Wichita, Kansas, where Mrs. Ruth Finley has just had a very terribly traumatic day. While working in the garden, her husband, Ed, suddenly dropped down. Now, they dropped to the floor. They suspected it was a heart attack, so he was taken to the hospital immediately. Unfortunately for Ruth, Ed would be spending a couple days in the hospital to be monitored to see what actually happened, and that is not something Ruth was used to, being home alone, that is. And it really put her on edge. So she thought what she would do is she would listen to the radio, kind of take her mind off some things. So as she turns on the radio, the airwaves are littered with talks of the BTK strangler who was on the loose in the area at the time, which is probably another serial killer some of you are familiar with if you're into true crime. And I would imagine you are, being here listening to me talk. So this talk of the BTK killer is not calming Ruth's nerves. Like I said, it's been never in her and Ed's marriage has she ever been home alone. So she puts on some easy listening just to kind of calm her nerves. And while she's sitting around the house listening to the radio, she gets a phone call. On the other end of the line, there is a gentleman who is asking if he is speaking to Ruth Smock from Fort Scott, Kansas. Now, Smock was Ruth's maiden name, which she hadn't heard in forever. And of course, she says, yes, this is Ruth. It's when she confirmed that it was her, the man's voice changed to a very, very low, ominous tone. And he says, I know all about that night. Ruth, who was kind of stunned, but still did not know what this man was talking about, listened, and the man began reading an article from the 1946 Fort Scott Tribune. The article read, branded on both thighs with a hot flat iron, apparently by a sex maniac. Ruth Scott, 16-year-old Fort Scott high school girl, was resting today at her parents' home following an attack upon early last night. The article was mentioning a night that Ruth had came home after getting groceries and went into her home. And when she went into her home, a man had followed her inside, broke into her house, and then assaulted Ruth. As the man was attempting to assault Ruth, she jammed her thumb into his eye, fighting back. He then shoved a chloroform rag into her mouth, and as she's fading in and out of consciousness, the last thing she sees is this man heating up a flat iron on the stove, and he ended up branding both of Ruth's thighs with said flat iron. Now, this caller who is reading this article to Ruth is reading it with great confidence. Ruth is absolutely terrified. It's a night that she wanted to forget. She didn't ever want to remember. So she says, "I don't know what you're talking about." Which was a lie, because Ruth knew exactly what he was talking about, and the caller knew that she knew what he was talking about. He said that he was a construction worker in Fort Scott, and he was demolishing old houses where he found a yellow newspaper clipping of this attack, and that if she did not send him money, he was going to spread the article of the attack all over her town. So essentially he's trying to blackmail her, which so the biggest thing is Ruth and Ed both grew up in the Great Depression. They were depressed. Their parents were or Ruth's parents at least, were very impoverished rural farmers. And back then it was like, I'm trying to find a correct way to put this. The life that Ruth aspired to live was an ordinary one. That's ultimately what they wanted. They wanted to be financially secure and normal. That's it. So to some people, this blackmail of this incident would not be, it's like, whatever, dude, like something tragic happened to me and you're trying to blackmail me, yeah, get lost. But to Ruth, it scared her because she didn't want any gossip around her name or any attention drawn to her. Now, Ruth was visibly shaken, and the call really did bother her, but she chose to call the man's bluff and ignore it. Ed remained in the hospital for another week. He actually did not have a heart attack. He had, it was due to an injury he received in a car accident not long before. So Ruth remained home for another full week until Ed returned. She dreaded a phone call that entire time, but a phone call never came. Finally, her husband Ed comes back home, and she feels that life is now returning back to normal and everything's fine. Later that summer, though, Ruth receives a letter on her desk at work. She is a secretary for the head of security at the telephone company in town. The letter had her name written in really scraggly letters. So she opens the letter, and inside is the article from the Fort Scott Tribune of her attack. Ruth quickly ripped up the article and threw it in the trash and was hoping that was the end of it, but they began receiving regular calls from this man. When Ruth would pick up the phone, the man would begin to say her name and she would just hang up. When Ed picked up the phone, the caller hung up immediately. So in August of 1977, Ruth is in downtown. She is window shopping. She's not really paying much attention to the people around her, kind of just going about her way. Nothing seems out of the ordinary when a man starts matching Ruth's stride. He's walking next to her. She hardly notices him until he speaks, and he says, "You've done such a good job at work this week." Ruth ignores him, and he says, "You can take the weekend off." And Ruth continues to ignore him. He keeps trying to talk to her. He says, "You work at the telephone company, don't you? What do you do there? Are you an operator?" So Ruth, wanting to be polite, continues, she doesn't want to be rude, but she also doesn't want to talk to this man, so she just ignores him. He then talks about how, I just won some money in Vegas. Have you ever been to Vegas? Would you want to go? Blah, 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 blah. Ruth continues to ignore him. He then says, "The camera reflects the true quality of one's soul," Ruth was like, what are you talking about, weirdo? So Ruth at this point is more annoyed than scared. She doesn't really take this dude as a threat. So she just looks at him and says, "I'm waiting for my husband." She then starts to walk off again, and the man stops and looks at her and says, "Are you still married?" And when Ruth chose not to respond to this man, he grew very angry and he said, "I like your face. I'll be seeing you again. You can count on that. Some people's fantasies are other people's nightmares." And then he walks off. So Ed finally comes and picks Ruth up. So Ruth tells Ed about this weird encounter. Ed assures her it's just some guy trying to pick her up, and they let it go. But Ruth is now kind of wondering if that had been the man that had been calling her home. So Ruth did not see that man for quite some time, and then about a year later in June of 1978, she was once again shopping downtown. She's walking past an alleyway between two of the buildings when somebody reaches out and grabs her wrist. It was the man from prior, and he says, "Ruth, get back here, you stupid B-word. Why won't you talk to me?" he pleaded. Ruth ends up breaking free and runs across the street to a Macy's department store. She gets to the 5th floor before she realizes where she's at. She calls Ed, has him come pick her up immediately. Once Ed shows up, she then decides, she tells him what happened. She also tells Ed about the phone calls that have been coming in because she hadn't told him about that prior. She didn't want to raise a ruckus or a fuss or anything. After she tells him everything, Ed basically says, okay, let's go make a police report since it's gotten this bad. They make a police report, but there's not really any follow-up on it. The reasoning some people speculate is because the police department had their hands full at the time with the BTK strangler, so all their efforts were focused on that, and this slight harassment, as I'm sure they saw it, was not of utmost importance. So that October, Ruth is sitting in her kitchen with a cup of coffee. She gets a letter in the mail. It's addressed to her. It's got scraggly handwriting on it. Ruth got a really uneasy feeling about it, but she still opened it. The letter read, "F you, F the police, F the telephone company." And this obviously made Ruth very uneasy because this person apparently knows that they went to the police now, knows that she works at the telephone company. She begins pacing back and forth until Ed finally arrives back home. Once Ed arrives home, she tells him about it. She shows him the letter, and they decide to go back to the police department. I apologize. Ed insisted that they went to the police department. Ruth was not sure about it. Finally, November 6th, Ruth and Ed end up going to the police department again and telling them about what's happening. They're directed to the 5th floor of the police headquarters building, which is criminal investigations. There, they speak with Detective Bernie Drowatsky. He's a 34-year veteran of the force. Usually, Drowatsky would not be taking a case like this, but the BTK strangler was on his 3rd year of his murdering spree, so he wasn't going to pass up anything that could maybe lead him to catching the BTK killer. The BTK strangler, I'm sorry. He was, BTK was also known to send letters to his victims. That's why Drowatsky was like, I'm gonna look at this lead just to make sure it isn't him. So Drowatsky interviews Ruth and Ed. They tell him, we're ordinary people. They're empty nesters. They have 2 grown siblings. They have 2 grown children. They don't have any enemies that they can think of, and they lived on a fairly quiet street, and nothing out of the ordinary happened to them until this. Drowatsky was very underwhelmed by this since he had been dealing with violent criminals prior, as well as dealing with BTK at this point, but he did assure the Finleys that he would look into it. So the following week, another letter shows up in the Finleys' mailbox, and it's demanding $100 from them. The letter reads, "I can tell if anyone is watching me. Don't be a dumb B-word again and blow this. I will try and be your friend, but when you are a dumb B-word, I don't like you. This time, you talk to me when I call you soon." The writer finished off with a crude poem reading, "Wherever you go on water and land, you still got to pay or I'll tell about your brand. I am smart and know things to do. You talk to people I despise, like police lieutenant and telespies." So these letters were also riddled with spelling errors and stuff like that. So if they read weird, that's why. So each letter they received, they turned over to Drowatsky. I don't know if you can hear it, but War Chief is just going to town on these catnip toys. Her and Toothless both lick the hell out of them for some reason. Anyways, they turn the letters in to Drowatsky. One of pretty much standard protocol, what they would do is they would turn the letters into Drowatsky. He would then send the letters off to the lab to run for fingerprints, and then he would then return the letters back to the Finleys. Ruth would also attempt to retype them to try to, so Lieutenant Drowatsky can have like an easier time reading them, because they were, like I said, riddled with spelling errors, grammatical errors, punctuation errors, you name it. It had it. So November 21st of 1978, Ruth is doing her daily window shopping that she usually does while she waits for her husband Ed to get off work and come pick her up in the downtown area of Wichita. As she's walking, she's cut off by a 1964 cream-colored Chevy Bel Air. The gentleman that she had run-ins prior with gets out of the vehicle and exclaims to her, "Do you have my money?" Ruth looks around and she can only see a old lady up the street. Is that even? That looks fairly even. She can only see an old lady up the street, so she knows that she is essentially alone. The man again exclaims, "Do you have my money?" He then kicks Ruth in the shin very hard, causing her to kind of double over in pain. I don't think that's even. Hold on, let me redo that. All right, I think that looks fine. So I start darkening it. Who knows? We'll see. Any hoozle. So he kicks her in the shin rather sharply, love. He puts her in the Chevy Bel Air, jumps in. There's another gentleman driving that she hears. Her attacker... Are you done? Referred to as Buddy. So while Ruth is in the backseat of this messy vehicle, they are going through her purse. They find her paycheck. They also find money. They also find a safety deposit box key. They're really ecstatic at this point. They're like, man, we just struck it big. We're rich, blah, 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 blah. Then the gentleman finds a business card for Detective Dorotsky, and he becomes extremely enraged and picks up a piece of concrete that was in the car and hits Ruth in the face with it. Now, these men drive Ruth around for about 4 hours. The whole time she is trying to listen in on their conversation as much as she can, figure out anything she can about them. She hears, like I said, her attacker called the driver Buddy. The driver is drinking out of a bottle wrapped in a brown paper bag. The driver also mentions that Sears couldn't, messed up fixing his car or something or another. Now, Ruth does remember, though, that she has a can of mace hidden away in her purse. She's too scared to reach for it, though. But she knows it's there, and if she gets the chance, she's going to reach for it. Now, after, like I said, driving around for 4 hours, the sun starts to set. It gets really cold out. Ruth tells the men that she has to use the bathroom. They just kind of laugh at her. She says, "I'm going to puke if you don't let me use the bathroom." It begins dry heaving, kind of gagging herself. They say, okay. Fine, we'll find a place for you to go to the bathroom. So the men pull into a nearby park. The driver, Buddy, stays in. Her attacker gets out, takes her with him. They take her shoes and her coat so she won't run off. Her attacker, as he's walking with her, he's like, "Ooh, this will be fun. You watch me and I'll watch you." Just being really, pervy. So they allow her to take her purse with her. And so as they're walking, Ruth is reaching into her purse for a can of mace. Her attacker ends up, he's unbuckling his jeans to drain the old main vein, and Ruth sprays him with her can of mace and takes off running. So the man is enraged, obviously. He starts yelling at her, "You're going to freeze if we leave you here. Come get your shoes and your coat and we'll be real nice to you, blah, 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 blah." Obviously, Ruth is not going to fall for this. She stays in the hiding spot she's in, even though her feet are becoming numb due to the cold. So she comes out of her hiding spot and she sees that the men are no longer there. Their vehicle is gone. She starts running to try to find the nearest, form of help she can. She ends up coming up to a liquor store that was open late. She runs inside. The owner calls the police. She also asked the owner to call her husband as well, Ed. By the time Ed got to the liquor store, the police had came and picked Ruth up. They took her to the hospital to get checked out, and then Ed meets them at the police station. When he meets up with Ruth at the police station, Lieutenant Dorotsky basically tells Ed, this is what happened. They made off with all of this stuff. Ruth is okay, though. He's growing more concerned. He doesn't let the Finleys know this, but he's growing more concerned because the individual that is stalking and attacking Ruth is just very much reminding him of BTK. He doesn't want to further alarm the Finleys, but it's causing him to take this case a lot more seriously. Detectives also go to the park where Ruth was taken. They find her shoes and her jacket, but they don't find any evidence to point to who could have done this. So like I said, with Lieutenant Drowsky, believing that this could be the work of BTK, he just full throttles this investigation. Ed was referred to the man as the poet, and that name started sticking. So as this investigation goes full scale, police throw out pretty much a blanket of protection around Ruth. They have officers following her and watching her while she goes on her lunch break. And a detective named George Anderson even goes as far as to taking Ruth and Ed to Fort Scott, where she had been attacked when she was younger. And they worked with the Fort Scott Police Department, and they looked through a ton of mugshots, lineups of men they think could have may be doing this, or something of the sorts in the area, and it came up with nothing. So as I said, they throw out this blanket of protection, you know, they try to go to Fort Scott, what have you, nothing really comes out of it. The investigation just kept dragging on. Eventually, Lieutenant Drowatsky even goes on a talk show to tell Ruth and Ed's story, and while he's doing this, Ruth and Ed are listening in on the incoming callers to see if any one of them sound like the poet. You know, unfortunately, no success came out of that. Ruth was experiencing awful headaches and stomach cramps on a daily basis. She figured they could be psychosomatic due to the stress that she was enduring from this. But, you know, like I said, she was raised in the Great Depression where you didn't complain about anything. You didn't bring any attention to yourself either. And she didn't want to be the, you know, town gossip, this, what have you. So most nights in the Finley house were spent with Ruth attempting to sleep in her and Ed's bed, and then Ed sitting in the bushes in the backyard with a 12-gauge shotgun waiting for the poet to show up. And he spent hours and hours of the night out there. So fast forwarding to July 1979, the letters had actually stopped, and Ed and Ruth were hopeful that the poet had moved on, forgotten, I don't know, just weren't harassing them. They were happy about that fact. So much as they even went to go ahead and plan their summer vacation to a dude ranch in Colorado. Dude ranch is such a funny description for something. But anyways, so around August 13th, Ruth wanted to buy a new pair of jeans to take along with them. She goes to a Dillard's department store at the Town East Mall. She goes, gets what she needs. Ed was very uneasy about letting her go off on her own without, like, you know, him or some kind of protection. But Ruth assured him, oh, you know, I'll be fine. Spoiler alert, she was not going to be fine. So as Ruth is walking out of the Dillard's with her jeans, the summer dusk is setting. The parking lot is dark, it's mainly empty, so she begins walking towards her car, being very vigilant, looking around, you know, she's kind of getting an uneasy feeling. When she's almost to her vehicle, she hears a man's voice shout out, "Hey Ruth, I didn't know you were going to make it this easy." The man ends up attacking her as she tries to get into her vehicle. He grabbed her wrist, throwing a bag into her partially open back window that contained tape, rope, a red bandana, and a half-drunken bottle of wine. He's telling Ruth that he wants to take her somewhere nice and quiet, somewhere that has a keep out sign. Ruth ends up breaking free and is trying to step around the vehicle to get in so she can escape. That is when this man pulls out an 8-inch boning knife, stabs Ruth twice in the back. She manages to get in the car. She shuts the door. She starts rolling up the window. The man's hands get caught in the window, and he pulls them out, leaving his glove wedged between the window and the door. Ruth takes off. She's feeling very lightheaded, very woozy. She gets to a stoplight when she looks, and she sees that in addition to the man stabbing her twice in the back, the 8-inch boning knife is sticking in her side, and she's dripping blood all over the interior of her car. Ruth sees a gas station up ahead. She quickly goes to the payphone that's outside of it. She calls the only police number that she can remember, and it's police headquarters. It's Lieutenant Drowatsky's boss, Captain Thimish picks up the phone. Ruth starts, explaining who she is. Captain Thimish cuts her off and says, "Ruth, I know who you are. What's going on?" She tells him what happened and what's going on. Captain Thimish sends an officer to Ruth immediately, but Ruth, fearing that her attacker had followed her or was going to see her and come and try to finish her off, she gets in her car and she drives the 5 minutes back to her house. Captain Themish had already called Ed and explained what happened to what is happening. So as soon as Ruth pulls up to the home, Ed is waiting for her on the porch. She gets out, Ed comes to her aid. She asks Ed to pull out the knife that was in her side. Ed keeps it, doesn't do that. He keeps it in, fearing that pulling the knife out will cause more bleeding, which is what you are supposed to do if you get stabbed or something like that. One of the things stopping that wound from bleeding so much is what is lodged inside of you. So do not, remove, if you get stabbed, don't remove the knife until you can get to a medical professional. So Ruth is taken to the hospital. She's treated for her wounds. The local paper starts pushing this story hard. She just survived this attack. Is this the work of BTK, or is there another copycat killer on the loose? What's going on? While in the hospital, nurses told Lieutenant Drowowski that a man fitting the poet's description had showed up and asked about Ruth. This made Lieutenant Drowowski fearful that the poet would show back up after Ruth had been released. So once she was released, he stayed with the Finleys for 48 hours just to make sure they were under protection. So in the meanwhile, Ed puts in an ad with the local paper. That ad read, "Poet, tell me what I owe you," signed RSF. And that's when the news and the media started picking up on the name The Poet, to the point that even the poet himself started using that name. He also begins communicating with Ed through the classified ads in the paper. One of those communications reading, "To RSF, the price of my service to stay alive can now be settled at 5. Never specifying 5,000, 500, or anything like that, but it started seeming like this was a game to the poet more than anything else. He didn't mention in one of his letters saying, in reference to Ruth, the 7th and hardest to find, which again reference BTK, so it really pushed that narrative that they were dealing with BTK and that they weren't two separate people. In October, the local paper, the Eagle Beacon, had revealed that the poet had actually been sending them letters for the past 6 months. One of those letters read, "If any had a brain, no one would have pain. Good or evil, my secret shall not be known. I unnoticed go my way, I may just prosper for one day." And in apparent reference to BTK, he warned, "Make sure you don't confuse the executioners again." So, he was kind of pushing this weird narrative that he was BTK, and then with that, it's basically him saying, I'm not, I'm a different person. Make sure you don't get us confused again so I get the recognition I deserve. The paper then releases another composite sketch of the poet. They get about 25 calls saying that they know who that is, or they've seen someone that looks like that, or what have you, but they really don't turn into anything fruitful. But this story nonetheless has captivated, Ruth's entire town. So with this case being in full drive, police just start redoubling their efforts to catch the poet. They're going through any case files that involved, assault to a knifing, stabbing, whatever they can maybe pull up that would fit the poet's MO. When Ruth is walking around downtown shopping, she is accompanied by 8 undercover police officers at all times, and they have her wired for sound if, when she enters these particularly risky areas, so if she gets, abducted again, they can get a recording of it. But even though they're doing all this, even though Ruth is under constant surveillance, nothing happens. Nothing turns up. They had reason to believe that the poet was stalking the Finley's house. They just couldn't get any information on this person. It goes so far to the point that Ruth even goes under hypnosis to try to remember more things about him, about the phone calls, about the abduction, everything. And she does this with Dr. Donald Schrag, who is a psychologist in Wichita who has also helped with the BTK strangler case. But no new information came out of the hypnosis sessions. Dr. Schrag did state that the poet had serious emotional and mental problems, saying that he might, it's likely he was in an institution at one point, and then referring to his letters and such, saying that he's probably of rather high intelligence. So in January of 1980, Lieutenant Jaworski is promoted to vice and organized crime. And one thing that should be noted is that Jaworski was very close with the Finleys through all of this. The investigations, constantly being at their house and stuff like that, they had developed a very close relationship. They were friends, essentially. They went to church together. They spoke very often. They talked very often. So, Lieutenant Jaworski saw this as, helping friends rather than just helping, a victim for his job. And when Captain Mike Hill took over, he did not have that kind of relationship with the Finleys. So Hill was put in charge of special investigations, which was covering Ruth's case as well as the BTK Strangler case. So he had a pretty full play right out of the gate. Hill decided was looking through all the reports, as one does when he takes over. He kind of kicked around the idea that maybe the Finleys were doing this to themselves, but after looking at extensive medical reports of Ruth's attack, it was stated that there was no way she could, in the angle the knife was lodged into her side, there was no way she could have done it herself. And after, interviewing individuals on the case, detectives that have worked with them, police officers that have, it was also stated, Ed could not have it in him to stab his wife. And what gain are they getting from this if it was them, if you know what I mean. So the poet took notice in this change of command. He then writes Captain Hill a letter, starting it with, "There once was a captain who had an a-hole for a heart," which I think is frankly hilarious. So moving on Christmas Eve, the Finley's phone lines were actually cut. Now, this being the second time, the phone company comes out and ends up burying the line so it doesn't happen again. Meanwhile, Captain Hill installed security cameras on the Finley's property. He had police officers monitoring those cameras 24 hours a day. Ruth had felt bad that these officers had gotten such a boring shift, so she was regularly baking them pastries. She would often read the poet's letters out loud to them as entertainment, even though it gave her quite a big headache. But these officers were making quite a big chunk of money in overtime, though, just to watch some security cameras. So, give and take a little bit there. Boring, but money, and you get pastries. Who doesn't love pastries? I bet Ruth was a great cook. January 25th, 1980, Ruth reports that she gets a call from her job while she's at work, The poet tells her that he had left a surprise for her in the lobby. When detectives go down and look, they find a 12-inch butcher knife wrapped in a red bandana in one of the phone booths in the lobby. Two witnesses then state that they do remember seeing a man who fit the poet's description, in that phone booth, and police feel like they've got somewhat of a break. The poet also had written a poem that said, "Shut your eyes and think of the 12-inch blade. Will you remember the hole it made? Dream of me and obey my commands. Think of me with a knife in my hand." So the poet's letters increased over time. Like I said, they had plainclothes officers walking with Ruth at all times, blending in with the crowd, so in case anyone tried to attack her, they would easily be apprehended. But all of this, despite how much effort they went to, it never provided success. It never worked. It seemed as if the poet was always just one step ahead of them. So on the 4th of July, the story breaks national news. The National Enquirer putting out a very accurate article of the story. They had done interviews with Captain Hill, with Ruth and Ed. The story, again, like I said, was insanely accurate, and none of it was exaggerated because it was just that insane of a story that people were captivated by it. There was no need to turn it into a tall tale because it was already just absolutely bananas to begin with. The poet continued sending letters, and these letters weren't just going to Ruth. He was also sending them to various businesses in the town, like the DMV got a letter saying they should revoke Ruth's license for her erratic and reckless driving behavior. A construction company got a letter saying that they to go and dig up Ruth and Ed's driveway. The utility company got a letter asking to turn Ruth and Ed's services off. And then a flower shop in the area got a $5 bill sent to them asking them to deliver one black rose to Ruth's address. So meanwhile, the police are doing just about everything they can. They've set up more security cameras at the Finleys. They are combing through every letter sent to the utility company to see if any handwriting matches the poet's handwriting. I would hate to have that job. That sounds insanely boring. The Finleys then receive a letter from the poet that's postmarked from Oklahoma. This is the first letter that is sent from is not sent from Wichita, so the police think the poet may have moved to Oklahoma. And again, they're relieved because this is kind of a break. You know, they finally have something new to go off of instead of exhausting old leads. They get in touch with the Oklahoma Police Department in their Bureau of Investigations. They end up apprehending a man that fits the description of the poet. He also fits the psychological profile that was created by Dr. Murray S. Myron, who was a psychologist at Syracuse University. So like I said, they bring this man to Wichita. Ruth goes, they go for a lineup. After really careful consideration, ultimately it's not the poet, and they end up, you know, the man goes back to Oklahoma, and again, they don't have any more leads. Police are not any closer to finding the poet. The letters ramp up. The Finleys had a wreath hanging from their door around Christmas that the poet set on fire, causing one of their windows to shatter. A piece of concrete had been thrown through another window at one point. Like I said, the threatening letters kept coming. They were no closer to finding him. They kind of just felt like, you know, this dude was uncatchable, that, you know, this was going to continue until either the poet killed Ruth or something else happened. So Friday, September 14th, 1981, Lieutenant Drowatsky approached his police chief, Richard Lemunyon. Now, Richard was the type of chief that had full faith in his detectives. He did not get involved with their cases. He knew that they did not like to be micromanaged, and they were good at what they did, so he trusted them enough to where he wouldn't have to hover over them all the time. Lieutenant Drowatsky then tells Chief Lemunyon that the poet had sent him a letter. The letter had basically said once the poet was done with Ruth, he was going to then go after Lemunyon's wife. He knew what her route was. He knew what kind of car she drove. He knew her day-to-day. So Chief Lemunyon was like, yeah, I think the F not. Absolutely. Not going to happen. This prompts Chief Lemunyon to get every single bit of information about the poet that the police have. He takes it home over the weekend, and he begins studying it intensely. Friday, September 11th, Chief Lemunyon calls a meeting with 16 of his officers. He does it in the basements, I think, one of their interrogation rooms or something like that. Essentially, it was a soundproof room that had also been designed to for the department in case of like a severe thunderstorm or tornado or something like that. He made this meeting as confidential as possible. So Chief Lemunyon's disconnect from the Finleys, he did not know them, he didn't have a personal relationship, he knew about them, but he didn't know them personally, is actually what played a pivotal role in his findings. After he's got all the officers, he then tells them that he believes that Ruth Finley is the poet. Before any officers, well, especially the ones that knew Ruth very well and were close friends with her and Ed, before they respond, he goes into why he thinks that she is the poet. He says that even though the poet's attacks were done in public, sometimes in broad daylight, there were never any witnesses to them. And that's very suspicious for the time of day they happened and how public of a setting it was done in. Another reason was that the Finleys lived on a relatively quiet street, and not just a quiet street, it was a dead-end street. So all the times that the poet had thrown things through their window, lit that wreath on fire, dropped letters off, what have you, it was highly unlikely that he wouldn't have been seen by a neighbor. You know, this is not a quiet story. The entire town knows, so if the neighbors would have been extra vigilant seeing if somebody they didn't recognize was on the Finley's property. It just didn't make sense that the neighbors had never seen a single person of suspicion walking around or near the Finley's property. Another reason was that when they went back and they investigated the park that Ruth had been abducted and taken to, they found Ruth's shoes and her jacket, but they only found one set of footprints, and that was Ruth's footprints. They never found another set. She also stated that she had been struck with a piece of concrete during the abduction, but her face did not show any signs of any abrasions from where she had supposedly been hit. After she had been stabbed in the parking lot, Ruth left and got to the nearest phone, But for some reason, instead of her calling 911, she dialed General Investigations, she states that that was the only number she remembered, but why not just dial 911? It was very suspicious. Captain Hill had also received a letter from the poet as soon as he took command. As soon as he took command of the investigation, Captain Hill gets a letter. Well, the only people that knew that Captain Hill had assumed command of the investigation was Ruth, Ed, and the police. And he did not believe that it was another officer in their department doing this. As soon as the birdhouse security camera was placed on the Finley's property, the poet stopped showing up in Ruth and Ed's backyard. And one of the last pieces of evidence that led him to believe that it was Ruth doing this was, like I had said prior, Ed and the poet were corresponding with each other through the classified ads. Well, the messages from the poet quit when the Finleys went on vacation and then immediately picked back up when they had came back. Like I said, LeMunion's disconnect with the Finleys allowed him to make this assumption because the officers had been working on this case, had grown fond of the Finleys. They grew these relationships with them. So the idea that the Finleys would be doing this to themselves was out of the park. Absolutely not. But LeMunion was for certain that it was Ruth, saying that, it being Ed didn't make much of any sense, but they still had to make sure Ed was not a part of it. LeMunion then says that they're going to start 24-hour surveillance of the Finleys. They're not going to tell them, though, obviously, and that these officers cannot tell this to anybody, not even their spouses, because if if the Finleys catch wind, Ruth catches wind of what they're doing, it'll throw the entire investigation off. And he also stated that if the press caught on to this and this information was leaked, that he would fire every single person in the room. So September 14th, surveillance began. 3 days later, they get their first break. They spot Ed driving the Finley's vehicle to Eastgate Mall, and then Ruth reaching out of the passenger side window and dropping off a few letters. It was instructed that a undercover officer as well as a helicopter would be following the Finleys no matter where they went. So like I said, police watch as Ruth drops these letters into the mailbox. Later, when the Postal Service comes to pick up the mail, police stop them, they confiscate the mail as evidence, and they go through it. Upon this pile of mail, they found a personal letter from the Finleys. They found, I think, 1 or 2 bills that the Finleys were sending off to pay, and they also found 2 letters from the poet. Now, the police couldn't be 110% sure that Ruth had sent these letters because other people had used the mailbox throughout the day. So several days later, police are, they're investigating that. They're staking out that same mailbox. They see that the Finleys are going to it. Once they watch Ruth drop more letters into the mailbox, a undercover agent then pulls in behind them. After they leave, he parks in front of the mailbox and, acts like he has car troubles and that his car won't start, so nobody else can use the mailbox. As the Postal Service comes back, they take the mail again for evidence. The letters that they had caught prior, they still sent off to the their destination, so they didn't raise any kind of suspicion. So the second batch of letters that the police intercept, they find a bill payment for a credit card that the Finleys had, and they also found more letters from the poet. So they open them up, they read them, they reseal them, and they send them off to their destination. After the Finleys received the letters, Ed, doing what they normally did when they got letters from the poet, took them to the police station, gave them to police to be sent off to the lab. Police then end up searching Ruth's desk at her job, and in her desk drawer, they find paper with the poet's handwriting on it. They find a torn red bandana and a book of poetry, just to name a few items. Things that are very suspicious to the police now, and it's kind of, furthering LeMunion's assumption of Ruth being the poet. They start trying to obtain a search warrant for the Finleys' house. They really can't do that, though, because while they are certain that Ruth is the poet, they don't have any hard evidence to put against her. So after returning from a police convention, LeMunion and his wife find a letter from the poet addressed to them with the bottom of the paper is torn. he uses that letter along with the torn paper they found in Ruth's desk and send it to the forensics lab, and they see that it's the paper is from the same page. The tear fractures match each other. So the police end up basically completing their investigation. Now, the only thing they have left to do is to make sure that Ed is not a part of this entire ordeal, that he is not working with Ruth in being the poet. So on October 1st, Ed goes to the police station because they tell him that, you know, they have a batch of letters from the poet that are ready to be picked up because they usually give them back to him. Once Ed shows up, he's then brought into an interrogation room where police ask them if he can answer some questions. You know, Ed doesn't know why, but in his eyes, the police are not wrong. So if they want to ask him some questions, he's going to oblige. They read him his rights. They begin talking to him. He answers honestly, and after this, the police believe that there's no way Ed could be involved in this because no signs point to that. Captain Hill finally tells Ed, he says, "It's coming down today. I know who the poet is." Ed is thrilled at this. He says, "Well, I hope the hell you do. Let's go catch it." Captain Hill then shows Ed pictures of Ruth mailing off the letters, and he starts telling him that he believes that Ruth is the poet. Ed's obviously in shock. He has he doesn't know what to think of this. It's not something he would have ever considered. Captain Hill then tells Ed that the police are not mad at Ruth. They just want to get her the help that she needs. You know, he's wondering what about the stabbing? What about the men calling the house? This, that, and the other. Police tell Ed they need to strike him as a suspect. But to do that, he has to take a polygraph test. Ed, of course, obliges to the polygraph test. They say, they're going to take him to the Kansas Bureau of Investigations. They can do this. Ed says, of course, can we just stop on the way just so I can get some cigarettes? The police are like, absolutely, buddy. They go and take this polygraph test, and Ed passes with flying colors. So after that, police then go to the Finley's house, and with Ed's permission, they search the property. They find a ton of things pertaining to the poet. Carbon paper, pens, pencils, books of poetry, all types of shit that basically is telltale that Ruth is the poet. So later that afternoon, Lieutenant Drowowski meets Ruth at her job and says, "Hey, can you come down to the police station, look at some mugshots for us?" And Ruth is like, absolutely. After she arrives, the police take her to the same room that Ed was in. They're like, "Hey, we need to ask you some questions. We're going to read you your rights. Is that okay?" Now, Ruth is in the same mindset that Ed is in. The police are not wrong, so if they want to ask her some questions, well, she's more than happy to oblige. They start asking about her childhood, growing up, and a lot of personal questions, and Ruth is very confused on why they're asking about this, but again, they're law-abiding citizens, and just like Ed, she believes that the police are not wrong about anything. If they want to ask her questions, there's a reason for it, and she needs to answer. So she answers them all honestly. She doesn't shy away from anything, and she gives police her full cooperation. So as they're asking these questions, they get to the point where Ruth begins talking about the poet's activity, and Captain Hill's demeanor changes from being nice and friendly to kind of being more stern, asking Ruth if she had ever written any of the poet's letters. Ruth briefly mentions that her and Ed had thought about that, joking that police probably think one of them is a suspect. Captain Hill basically puts it all on the line and says, "Hey, we have evidence of you mailing these letters out. There's no denying that it's you." Ruth was kind of in shock. She asked Captain Hill when she would have mailed these letters out, and he starts showing her the pictures and the evidence. After seeing this evidence, Ruth, kind of hung her head and didn't make any protest of the accusations. As Captain Hill began asking Ruth about the incidents, the writing the letters and stuff, she could only remember them as fragments. She stated it was like she was remembering someone else's memory. It wasn't hers. She was like watching herself write these letters, but she never had the full memory of her writing the letters. Captain Hill, asked her, "Why would you do this, Ruthie? What was the reasoning for this?" And she just said, "I don't have one. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense to me either." And the only reason she was sure that she was the poet is because Captain Hill was showing her all this compelling evidence that pointed to her being the poet. You know, they genuinely believed that Ruth had no idea what she was doing, that she was doing it in this kind of dissociative state. The doctor that had initially created the profile for Ruth, the psychological profile, comes in to talk to her. He asked her if she wanted help. She said that she did, so they took her to St. Joseph's Hospital. She was then placed under 24-hour psychiatric care. While she was getting treatment in the in St. Joseph's, the police department was mulling over if they did in fact want to press charges against her, because at the end of everything, Ruth had costed the police department $370,000 in expenses. Chief Lemunyon was one of those that believed that she should have been prosecuted because, you know, she costed the department all this and expensive. She added to the stress of the department, not, you know, while one of Wichita's most prolific serial killers was on the run. He fully believed that she was a criminal and she should be arrested. You know, some charges should be drawn up against her, but ultimately the DA decided not to press charges because she did not have ill intent, and they genuinely believed that she was not aware that she was doing this. She was doing it, like I said, in like a dissociative state. Something much, much deeper was wrong. And they wanted to provide her with help for that. So Ruth then soon starts seeing Dr. Andrew Pickens. He was a psychiatrist who was tasked with helping her figure out why she was doing this, what were the reasons. He found that rather than talking about Ruth's childhood, he had her write poems about it. So Ruth did insist that she had a normal childhood growing up on a farm. Now, she did admit her childhood was impoverished because they grew up in the Depression, but nonetheless, she had a normal childhood growing up on a rural farm in Kansas. Well, the poems she was writing about her childhood exhibited extreme violence. So Dr. Andrew Pickens was like, okay, well, there's something much larger at play here that you're not remembering. So they, you know, continued to try to locate the source of Ruth's grief. You know, why was she going into this dissociative state? Why did these poems exhibit such violence? And finally they found it. When Ruth was a girl growing up on the farm with her parents, they had a friend who would regularly come over and visit the farm, and when he did, he would sexually abuse Ruth. He would use a red bandana to tie her up. He would often shove a red bandana in her mouth so she wouldn't make any noise, and he would sexually assault her. So the neighbor continued this abuse for almost a year. It caused this enormous guilt to grow inside of Ruth. She genuinely believed that she had deserved it and that she was being punished. Her parents were these taskmaker parents. They always had something to do for her. If she showed any signs of emotions like crying or any kind of distress, when the man would visit, her parents would scold her, they would punish her. You know, in that day and age, it was like, you don't show any kind of emotional duress or anything like that. You keep that shit bottled up, essentially. And it just furthered this attitude that she believed she deserved it, that she full and well believing that she deserved the harm that she received as a child, which is heartbreaking. So one of the things they were you know, figuring out was, you know, Ruth had these vague memories of writing letters as the poet, but like I said, they felt like memories of someone else. They didn't feel like her memories. She saw bits and pieces of it, but she never saw full-on memories of her writing these poems. As they went through her treatment, they realized during these assaults, when she was a girl, Ruth would disassociate to deal with these horrors of what was happening to her. She described it as floating off to heaven. She says she could see what was happening to the girl below, but it wasn't so bad if it wasn't me. I was just watching it, which is absolutely heartbreaking. You know, Ruth had kept these memories repressed for 40 years, and then the traumatic event happening with Ed ending up in the hospital, you know, Ruth believed that it being a heart attack, it could be something serious, along with the underlying threat of the BTK strangler being on the loose had caused these memories to resurface, and as a way to deal with these memories, Ruth created the poet. So Ruth still does also, if you were wondering, she also is adamant that the attack involving the hot flat iron from when she was a kid in the beginning of the story, it did happen. It was a real event that did occur. So she begins working through these issues, obviously, and through all this, Ed fiercely stuck by her side, as did her children and siblings. She lost a few friends, but most individuals looked at her with sympathy. They believed, you know, the story that, you know, she had repressed these memories of what happened to her as a child. There wasn't many people who believed that, she's faking everything. Chief LeMunyon still did believe that she knew exactly what she was doing. He says, I think, he believed that something did happen to her as a child, but, she knew exactly what she was doing and was still quite upset they did not press criminal charges against her. So after overcoming this trauma, this abuse, she finally begins feeling comfortable enough to go on like a local talk show. She believes that telling her story will help other survivors feel more comfortable with telling their story. And that's what she continues to do. And she never wrote poetry again after that. But in May of 2019, I believe, at the age of 89, Ruth Finley passes away. Oh, and I forgot to mention, like I said, she had costed the department $370,000. In today's money, that'd be around $1 million. So I get why LeMunyon was upset. And I don't know what what do you choose to believe? Do you believe that she knew exactly what she was doing, or do you believe that it was legitimate that she was using the poet in a disassociative sense to deal with the resurfaced trauma? I'm not sure what I believe, because I can definitely understand, the human body does crazy things to deal with severe trauma, especially the kind of trauma Ruth went through. I've been a victim of that kind of trauma as a child, so it was crazy that I didn't even remember any of that stuff until I was in like high school or almost out of high school, and then it started resurfacing. So yeah, I completely understand that, but as far as like not knowing exactly what she was doing or having no recollection of it, I don't know. No, I'm not, I don't know enough about that field besides my own personal experiences. But let me know what you think down in the comments. But that is the story. Absolutely wild, wild, wild tale of the poet Ruth Finley. I like the way this turned out. I think I did really like the scar was really good. I was gonna do like just red around the eyes and then like inverted crosses in red, but then I started doing the scar and I was like, this does not look bad at all. And then went into depth on the black eye. But I think it looks alright here. Let's zoom out a little bit. Now it's time for our part in the show where we pick next week's crime. Alright, let's see who we've got in store here. Shake, 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 shake. Alright, we'll set that right there. Damn, okay. We're going to take it all the way back with Jack the Ripper. All right, cool. Like I said, sometimes I stray a little bit away from cases every single person's heard of, but there should be a lot of information out there about this one, so that is definitely something we're going to be looking into now. I'm supposed to be visiting my family next weekend, so we may take a little break. I'm not sure, depending on if I want to record while I'm at my parents' house. I had to delete a bunch of stuff off this SD card to make room for this video because it's incredibly long. Hopefully I didn't delete any of the vlogs, but we'll see. Also, I am talking with some authors on No Sleep to see to get permission from them to narrate their stories and do that as well on the Twitch streams. Is that something you guys would be interested in? Because I like telling stories and I like narrating, so I figured it would be a fun thing, and I can upload these videos there to YouTube as well. Like I said, we got our channel monetized. Unfortunately, the true crime videos are only partially monetized due to the content that is in them, so we'll be putting out vlogs more and stuff like that because I can fully monetize vlogs and everything. And then hopefully I want to compile a decent number of the No Sleep stories up before I put out a video, so it's going to be a minute. Also, I think I'm going to start doing conspiracy theories as well. I don't know if we mentioned that earlier, but if you have some conspiracy theories you want to suggest, please leave them in the comments below, because I'm having trouble trying to pick which one I want to do for our first video. But thanks so much for stopping by for another episode of Crime and Cosmetics. I very much appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks for stopping by for another episode of Crime and Cosmetics. As always, I hope you have the best day ever. I hope all the good things happen to you. Be kind to others. Most of all, please, please, please be kind to yourself. And remember that this world would not be the world it is without you, and that you are genuinely loved and appreciated, and the feelings you're feeling are very valid. and it does get better, and you will work through them. And just know that this community is here for you whenever you need to talk. But I love you so much. I will see you guys again soon. Bye bye.